right, so for this next session, we're going to have our guest speakers come up, Pastor Ed, Pastor Nate again, and then Pastor Bob. And we're going to be going through some questions that you guys sent in on our little app QR code. Now, because we've already picked the questions up there, they're on there, you now have a chance to look at them and vote on them. So if you see one that you really want answered, you can vote them higher up the list. So we picked out of the questions, because there was quite a few of them, quite a lot. Thank you for sending them in. We picked the most ministry-focused ones of them all. So things that had to do with church culture, things that had to do with church staff, serving in ministry as a couple, all those different things that were more ministry related. So if you had more of a general Bible question, we didn't necessarily take that. So there was one such as like, how do you reach someone that is unreachable or lives on an island? We didn't take those types of questions. We strayed more towards the type of questions that would apply directly to ministry in the context of what this conference is. So if you're wondering why your question may not be up there, that's probably why. But if you scan the code, you're going to see a list of the questions that we did choose. You can upvote it. There's a little like button. And as they get upvoted, we will continue on. So I'll be emceeing it. You guys ready? Okay, so let's get this started. I think this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to go through, we'll put the questions up on the side screen, and we'll just take the first one. And whoever would like to take it, I'll offer it to the guys, and don't fight over the mics. Like, I don't want you guys to, Nate's ready, Sugar's ready. All right, so here we go. Can we get those questions up on the side screen? Question 1, 18 likes, here we go. What encouragement would you give spouses who need refreshed as they pour out so much of their heart into ministry? 20 likes, perfect, thank you guys. So we hear Bob is volunteering for this first one.
You know, there are seasons where you have to give everything you have to the needs that are there in front of you. And you've got ministry needs, you've got family needs, you've got children needs, but you have time together needs. And you have to schedule specific time away, even if it's like 2 or 3 days. And some of you who are in the ministry and you're married and you're both full on, you think, well, we don't have anybody to take it. Well, the middle part of the week is easier than the weekends for sure. But you really have to invest in your marriage, because I have watched so many in ministry several years down the road, all of a sudden there are 2 ships passing in the night, and they haven't connected for a long time. They haven't just had a real heart-to-heart. Even just having a night away where you just have some rules, where you just say, you know what, we're not going to talk about ministry, we're not going to talk about the kids, it's just you and me. And so I'm not sure where you have to go for that. You'll probably argue on your way there on which one we're supposed to go to. That's kind of how it usually ends up. And then how you get there is another issue altogether. You know, there's different preferences on the right way to get there. But I wouldn't really know that. So, but it's important to invest in you as a couple for the long-term future of your ministry, because you're supposed to be in it for the long game. A coach, when he coaches his players, even though he's having a bad quarter, a bad half, he can't just stick to his pre-scheduled format. He has to be able to flex and adjust, because he's in it for the long game. And not just for the game, but for the whole season. And so a good coach has his eyes on the end of the season. What's it look like at the end? And you as a couple, myself and my wife, we just have to look at the end game, and like Pastor Ed said earlier, finish well. Finish well today, finish well when you wake up, finish well, and just do it every day, and you will end up finishing well if you keep your focus.
I think the question too needs to be nuanced, right? So if it's a pastor, can you put the question back up? Which spouse are we talking about? Are we talking about the husband that's a pastor that needs to be refreshed? Are we talking about the wife who's married to a pastor and needs to be refreshed? Are we talking about a ministry couple? So whoever asked that question, do you want to clarify it? Are you in here? Who is it? Both. So both husband or pastor, wife. And then who needs to be refreshed? Both. All right. So I think Bob's answer was perfect.
Good job, Bob.
Josh, if I could just chime in on this one also. I think, that question, like you're alluding to the deep concern that you have for the church and how that is taxing. And I think we can all relate to that. Paul talked about sleeplessness often, and we even had a show of hands earlier today thinking about that. But when you are a married person, I find sometimes in ministry we can think that we're the only people that can care for the church. We're the only people that can do it. We're the only people that can take care of the needs that are there. And obviously there's times we're very alone in ministry, but when it comes to your husband and wife relationship, you really are the only one that can satisfy the need that your spouse has. There might be other people that are willing to step in, but don't let them. You have to really prioritize and say, you know what, maybe we need to slow down, maybe we need to let some things drop so that we can get time together to be refreshed. Josh, I'm also feeling like it's a little awkward, like we need to take an offering for that girl for the AirPod 2s. Like, I feel like everybody's mad at you right now. I don't know if you're feeling that, but
I'll take the hit as the rule holder. You cannot be mad at me. I established the rules.
Hey, Josh, was she in the room?
She was in the room.
All right. Loser.
No, that's harsh. She was the first place loser. So she won something. Nothing. All right, so next question. Sorry, Nicole, we love you. We love Roots Church. We love Chris very much. Just not enough to break the rules. All right, here we go. Next question comes with 33 likes. How does one maintain spiritual authenticity while functioning in an I'm fine church atmosphere? How can we as leaders pierce this stigma? Good question. Who'd like to take a, I think Nate Morris is, yeah, he's ready.
Yeah, so I think, so the question is, when your church has that atmosphere of I'm fine.
Yes.
Yeah, so like
yep.
so you go to church and everybody's like, oh, I'm fine, I'm good.
Yep, exactly. How do you pierce that stigma as a leader?
I think that being real is probably the best way to do that, is just sharing like the reality of life with people. And I think, I don't know how or why that developed, because that's not a biblical concept, this I'm fine mentality. I mean, you read Paul's letters and he's always talking about like his infirmities, he's talking about his struggles, he's talking about, being in weakness and fear. I mean, he's talking about these things regularly. And I do think I have not done a great job in the past of being that, you kind of like, you want to stand up and be the stalwart, like strong person that everybody looks to. And there's a sense in which that's true, but people follow the example you set, And if our example is one of everything's good, then that's what everybody else is going to do too. So, and I think that doesn't necessarily always have to come back to the senior pastor. I think that could come back to whatever role that you're in. And it's not you're walking around, oh, woe is me, Eeyore, that's not the point. But being real, and if you need prayer, asking for prayer, and just kind of opening that door to let people in. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that creating an environment too, like of safety and security, then invites authenticity. And authenticity means you're going to risk what people think about you. You're going to risk losing friendships. You're going to risk somebody. I was just reading this morning, Pastor Chuck was talking about how whatever it is in us that put pastors on pedestals, he was given the instruction, don't stand there. If somebody's put you on a pedestal, don't stay there, don't stand there. And, I think that authenticity is just being yourself and being able to be in an environment where you can share, even as Nate was, I think we were in an environment today where Nate was in the pulpit telling us about his anxiety. telling us about a very precise, specific time in his life. He wasn't general. He was like, man, I was told my wife I'm not in a good. Did you say I wasn't in a good place, or I'm not okay? Yeah, I'm not okay, and that's a pretty real thing to hear from the pulpit. I think that if you're the first person in your community of believers, I'm fine. If you're the first person that starts to be real, then it could start to encourage other people to be real. And I know that the dynamic of our church, I think our church has always had an environment to some degree of authenticity and real and a safe and secure environment. But after my son passed away, things radically changed here. And there was a tremendous open door of authenticity and realism, because that's what God was doing in me. And I think there is a pace where we as leaders, those of us that are leading in the church, we set the pace. So I think if you're a leader here and you're a pastor and you start to share the reality, even like in my message, maybe you are one of those guys that literally wrote a resignation letter. Well, sharing that, maybe even taking it into the pulpit and ripping it up and say, I won't do this again. But the fact that you did it, like, that would open up for people in your church to begin to question why. And they would have to be willing now to receive, well, because you're just a complainer all the time and you make me want to quit. Maybe that's a little too...
I'm going to write that one down. I just wanted to add, beyond being, because what these guys are saying is be the leader, the lead exemplar of this in your fellowship to an appropriate degree. And Ed's asking the question, was that appropriate? I don't know. But I think secondarily, I would say this is one reason I think that God has us serving in teams so often. If you and your eldership team or your pastoral team or your service team can cultivate that honesty with what you're struggling with, what's hard, temptations you're dealing with, pressures that you're up against, you won't just be exemplifying it, but you'll find healing there too. A great book on this subject is by Paul Tripp. I'm actually going to quote it in my sermon today, called Lead. And I can attest to you that a lot of the principles that are in that book are great for developing an honest community of leaders in your church.
Anything to add to that, Bob? Sounds good. All right, moving on. Next question. How do you balance the to-do list of ministry with intentional discipleship? I see myself neglecting discipleship because I have so much stuff to do. How do you balance the to-do list of ministry with intentional discipleship?
Well, I've been rethinking this whole thought of balance. And I'm coming to the conclusion that balance is not attainable. And so when you seek to attain something that's not attainable, then you add more frustration to your life, and you add more pain, and you feel like you're a failure because you're never attaining to what your goal was. And I like what Nate was just sharing about teams, and he used a real key word, and that's prioritizing. Jesus made it abundantly, balance makes it hard. Jesus made it abundantly easy when he said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And if I'm in right relationship with Jesus, then I know wherever I am, that's where God wants me. And I can't be two places at one time. So I'm here. I know other things are going to cost, other things are going to cost my time here. There's a lot of places I can't be because I'm committed to here. So with that in mind, as I'm still processing that for our own leadership, but I'm trying to get away from our leadership just talking balance. It's impossible. I mean, even the investment of this conference, you will never get this time back. You've invested it here. You're not going to be somewhere else. Back to the specific part of the question, was it discipleship and ministry? I think that in a very simplistic way, and then I'll let others add to it, make ministry, make discipleship part of the ministry that you're doing instead of seeing them as two separate things. And what I mean by that is If you have 10 tasks to do in a day, make sure one of those tasks is discipling, and find one to take out and say, okay, I've got to call someone today. I'm going to meet with someone today. I'm going to read a book with someone today. Something where ministry is discipleship and they're not against one another.
Yeah, I'd like to remind us all that discipleship is not a 12-week course. Discipleship is a lifelong walking alongside people. There's nothing like doing life together. Like if you have to go on a hospital visit or something and you're working with somebody, bring them along. Just do it together. Like was said earlier in the 2 Corinthians 6 study, workers together with God. Discipleship, sometimes we get this idea that everything has to be in a course. And so, I've been through my discipleship course. No, it was a long-term deal. And when we work with people in the church, even though, well, what if I raise up somebody and 2 years later they move away and then all that disciples? No, that's not kingdom mindset. That's just, trying to build up your own church. But you've got to think in the broader perspective that, like you as a leader, you're kind of like a foster parent, and you're taking care of these kids that have come into your family. And some of them will be longer term, some of them will be shorter term, but you don't withhold your love or your time from them. You love them because you want to be a change agent with the time you have with them. And so think of discipleship as the long-term, coming alongside, walking together. It can just be a trip to Costco together, but you're together and you can talk about things while you're doing just errands. And so discipleship can be, you can have a class and go deeper, but don't just limit it to the class. That's kind of my takeaway.
I would just throw out there too, Jesus said to go into all the world and make disciples. So that means sometimes the things we think are really important in church and ministry, we have to let them drop so that we can obey Jesus. Right now, my oldest daughter, she just left for college this last semester, so my wife and I are kind of going through it. But I've been trying to prepare myself and my wife for the inevitable adulting failures that will come. Like, hey, babe, the reality is she might not be able to afford her car insurance, and we got to be ready for that. We're not going to bail her out. So if her car just has to go away, it has to go away because we have a priority. We're trying to raise an adult. So we have to commit to not doing certain things to get the right things done. So maybe that's for you. Maybe there's things on your to-do list that they feel urgent, but actually they need to be dropped so you can make disciples.
That was good. That commitment to rule following, Nate, I feel that. Like you just, no matter what, man, that was for me. Sorry, Nicole. Yeah, amen. Here we go. All right, next question. Here we go. From Anonymous as well. Man, Anonymous sent in a lot of questions today. What are some ways your church is discipling your people? Do you have an intentional program or is it more organic? It's kind of good tail end with the last question. Yeah.
I think these guys just talked about that, really, like what the heart of discipleship is. I think programs are good, but they're always lacking. And I think the things that programs add that is good is structure and consistency. But really, we have a couple different things at our church. We have a men's discipleship program that guys go through, and it's a whole year-long program. They meet every other week, and it's really kind of an intensive, and it's really great. But really, our primary discipleship tool in our church, I would say, is just like small groups and getting together and that consistency in each other's lives and pouring into people. You know what I mean? I think Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ, right? And that was his discipleship as he's leading people. So again, I think programs have their place, but sometimes people come up to me and say, what's your discipleship program? And I'm like, I don't really want to have a program necessarily for discipleship. I want to lead people into it, and there's lots of different ways that you do that. Some of it's through serving. That's probably the best way to be discipled, is to step in and start serving somewhere. So.
Yeah, and I've never really had a leadership style either or. I like all of the above. So organic and systematized. We have a school ministry. We also have an invitation to come early and serve with us when we're cleaning the sanctuary. I mean, it's all about just let's be together. You know, proximity. Proximity, it's very undervalued in the body of Christ. And so proximity, being close to leaders, being close to servants, being close to the property, so that when you're trained, you know, I always think of the building as the opportunity for training for the real world, when you get to practice on one another. So when you go to work, go home, and your family. But I think that we have a school ministry. We have downstairs, the entire bookstore, for the most part, is our discipleship reading list. That's why it's so small. We went from one of those big bookstores where you could buy rings and, you know, necklaces and Christian t-shirts, to we repurposed that in fellowship area, and then went back to the model that we started as a church. You know, as I was talking about replanting and just rethinking, we started as a church, as a discipleship. Everything we do is discipleship. It's evangelism, discipleship, and mobilization. When disciples send, that's our church. And so we went back. So if somebody came up after a service and said, how do I grow in Christ? I will tell them, you know, email me, I'll send you a list. You can go downstairs and talk to Kurt. And every resource on that, every resource in that bookstore is on a list that we give for the purpose of discipleship. Because most of the discipleship is your response to some teaching. That's how Jesus discipled. He took them with him. They responded to his teaching. They followed him. They either did what he said or didn't do what he said, and that provided the discipleship opportunity. So we like it all. And if you have any great ideas of what you're doing, email us. I'd love to hear them, because different sizes for different people. Some people love classrooms, so we'll give them a classroom. Some people just want to hang out. We'll give them a hangout. Some people don't like to read. Sorry, you got to read. Readers are leaders, and leaders are readers. So you got to read. You got to grow in that area and discipline yourself. It could be like right now. That's probably a word from the Lord, where I'm just not a reader, but you need to become one, because there's a lot of great info that men and women that have gone before us can sow into your life.
I just want to know, did you guys get rid of even the testaments in the bookstore?
No, we have.
You remember those?
In your gift
The
bag.
testaments.
It's a great ad, Nate. Great ad. All right, anonymous. Next question. How do you know God's personal call on your life? That was one of the top rated ones. How do you know God's personal call on your life?
So God has a call on every believer's life, I think, is really the answer that I would give to that. And I mean, I have moments, sounds crazy, but God spoke to me through showing me the Big Dipper in the sky one time. It was like, your job is to feed people. I was like, okay. But I don't think that that's normative or should be. I think that God has a call on the life of every believer, and it is the call of the Great Commission. And I think that if you're speaking of a call specific to ministry, I think it's pray about it, get discipled, and see where God's blessing what you put your hand to, and see how God has equipped you, and go for it. You know, I think personally, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, for me, I just felt a strong sense of calling by God, but also at the same time just had a sense, because I had all these really mature teachers around me who were saying things like this, I had a sense that time will tell. And people are going to either receive what I'm doing or they're not going to receive what I'm doing. The church leadership is going to bear witness to what I'm doing or they're not going to bear witness to what I'm doing. This passion and burden is going to remain as I feed it and grow it, or it's not going to remain. Time will tell. But it started with that strong personal inclination, but then over time had to be tested by others, fruitfulness, faithfulness. and the Spirit, saying, I'm breathing on this. This is something I want to have happen in your life. So you might just have to give it time, but it begins with that internal, whether it's, did that happen to you, the Big Dipper thing? Yes. Yeah, that's awesome. Whether it's something like that, or for me, it was like just a random night of studying by myself where I felt like I heard God's voice say, I've called you to teach the word. And I didn't know what that meant or what that would look like, but it just impressed upon me. But I knew enough to know that's not enough. I have to see if this actually works over time.
I think there's an additional, there's an addition to this in knowing what your spiritual gifting is, because your calling will be very consistent with how God gifted you. And we really emphasize that here. We want you to know what your spiritual gift is, because that will help you know the trajectory of your life. If you're a very merciful person, then you want to make sure you're staying in ministries that will keep you in a place where your merciful gift can be used. If you're a teacher, you should be along the lines of knowing that you're in a teaching ministry or an administrative leader position. You want to make sure you're in those realms. And I was thinking, when Paul wrote to Timothy, he said, do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by the prophecy and the laying on of hands of the presbytery, is what Nate was saying. There's going to be an evidence among those you're serving. Then there's going to be an affirmation from the leadership. That's actually our view of ordination, that we affirm what God is doing. We don't convey it. Like, we don't give it to you. We just see it in you. And that's where proximity is everything. The more opportunities we get to see the giftings and the God using you in your life, the more that we can say, I see that in you. And sometimes the leaders will see things in you way before you ever see it. And you want to trust them and let them speak that into your life and affirm how God wants to use you. My call started very selfishly. As a new believer, I just thought, man, what does he do? Pastor Jeff, my pastor, he stands in the pulpit for 45 minutes and talks. I think I could do that. I literally had that thought. And you want to talk authenticity, then being the kind of wheeler dealer Jacob I was as an unbeliever, just really always trying to work a deal, I started thinking, wow, if they're ever going to get to know me, I need to start looking like them. So I watched the pastors, all the assistant pastors, and generally saw that they wore Dockers and polo shirts. And Marie and I had no money at all. I don't know how I was able to pull this off, but I bought a pair of Dockers, which were very expensive, and shirts that they were wearing, and I started wearing those clothes hoping they would see me and think I'm a pastor like everyone else. And I know it's kind of weird, but God was stirring all of that, wrong motives, completely needing things worked out in me. And so what did he do? He sent me to the nursery. And I started serving, holding babies. And then what he really wanted me to do, besides learning ministry with children, is connect me with a pastor named Rudy. And that would be the man that God used to break a lot of these things down and just teach me to serve. And that's just serve. Behind the scenes, unknown, nobody cares. They just give me my kid and make sure they're happy. The kids, I was in class, the kids don't know Hebrew and Greek, so you can't drop any new word on them. They're like, But, holding babies, they can tell if you love them or not. Teaching kids, look them in the eye, they can tell whether you care or not. And then God was saying, those kids that you're serving right now, they're connected to adults. So check in on them. They have a rough prayer request. Make sure the prayer. So looking at all of the call, it comes very, very differently, but it's affirmed and in very similar ways. And I like what Nate was going. If this is it, there'll be longevity. If this is it, there'll be longevity. If this is it, there'll be longevity and fruit. And that's how God measures things, through fruit.
Nate, I saw you reaching for the mic. Where you going?
I was just going to make fun of Ed for a minute, so that's okay.
Yeah, put that down. Put that down, Nate. Put that down. All right, here we go. We got a good one. Can you give some reasoning behind using the haze for worship? I would love to hear how it's used as worship and not just for the sake of entertainment. That was quick. Here we go, Nate. Go for it.
So when Isaiah had his vision of God seated above the throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple with glory, and it was full of smoke. The temple was full of smoke. There it is.
All right, there we go. Straight from the word. Take it. Next question.
So
I'm just kidding.
can you read that question again?
Yeah, and it's also on the screen too.
Where is
now. Can you give some reasoning behind using the haze for worship? I would love to hear how it's used as worship and not just for the sake of entertainment.
You know, it's an interesting word, whoever wrote that question, the word entertainment, because it's kind of like a red herring out there to throw out, like using something is automatically entertainment or is connected with entertainment. So it's good always to look up definitions of what entertainment is. And I looked up in the Merriam-Webster what entertainment is, because I saw these questions like you guys did earlier. And here's one of the definitions of entertainment. I don't know if you've ever considered this, but it's to keep or hold or maintain in the mind. So a form of entertainment is when you're entertaining something, you're connecting it in your mind. And so one of the things that we have to really wrestle with is where we all draw lines in our fellowships and how we can draw lines for our own personal fellowships while at the same time encouraging freedom in other fellowships without prejudging them or being upset that they might go farther than we could ever go. And I think that's the baseline in a discussion like this, because what you may view as entertainment, someone else may view, you're not even close to entertainment yet in the sense of a concert or that kind of environment with worship. So that is the baseline. I think you have to start thinking back now, the responsibility of this, of haze and lights, and let's start with basic. This is how we could worship. We could turn off all the lights and it'd be dark in here and have no instruments. And that would be worship. A cappella, no lights, sit down, close your eyes, worship in the dark. However, most of our churches have not chose to do that. There's some form of lighting, whether it's for safety's sake or for seeing your people in the sanctuary, we turn the lights on. Then there's lights on the stage. So some people are okay with these white lights, but then other churches are okay with these red lights. And then there might be purple lights behind me. And you see, you can start moving the line more and more until finally, well, wait a minute. It's hazy. I mean, you might call it smoke machine, but it's haze, it's water, it's a mist. So you got haze up there and you go, oh, that's too far. Okay, that's all right. But for other people, it's not too far. So I think from a pastor, I just want to encourage the freedom that if you land in a different place than someone else, it's okay. And we support you and encourage you. You're not a substandard Christian. You say, oh, we'll never have that. But you're also not a better Christian that another church might take that freedom. But I knew this question was coming. So the way we handle things here is the Lord has given us a worship leader, and I trust him. So I let him make these decisions in unity, like a team, just like Nate said. We're a team, but that's his responsibility. So I asked him what his answer was, and here it is. I have them because I want them. No, that's not what he said. That's not what he said. He actually wrote me a little answer. Let me read it to you. He says, haze is an element of production. It helps create a more intimate, inviting environment. Since we already were dimming the lights during worship, it made sense to help see the lights we were using. Production isn't a bad word. It all depends on what we are valuing. Haze helps create a texture, and I thought that was an interesting it's a new texture in the room. I'm like, that's cool. Haze helps create texture for our worship services with lighting, screens. Our cameras have better depth with haze. It's the same concept for the golden hour in photography. If you've ever been up for sunrise or watching the sunset, what helps make it more engaging is when you see lights through clouds. The light is softer. Hazers help you see the light because it's effectively moving through something.
Wow. Ian, you should be up here answering that. I had one thing to add. I think that there's we are resistant to change. And I think if you think back through church history, churches have always had a heart to strive to create beautiful atmospheres to engage our heart in worship of our King. And that's the whole heart of it. If you've ever gone to one of these huge basilicas or places in Europe, you walk in and you're in awe because you're like, this is amazing. And the point of it was to represent the grandeur of our God, right? You look through the stained glass, which again is colored light coming through into the building. And the point of it is not to look at the stained glass and think, oh, that's really cool. The point of it is to engage your heart with worshiping God. And I think for us, that's the same thing. And people are always resistant. I mean, the campus that we planted is a video campus, and we have a giant LED, like Jumbotron screen on the stage in a small church. And it's like, people are like, that doesn't work. I don't really get that. But then it does work. People are engaging and they're worshiping the King. And that's the point of it all, right? And so we will use, I love Pastor Ed's slogan that they have downstairs. It's covered up right now, but we'll do anything short of sin to reach people for Jesus, right? Anything short of sinning, we will do in order to reach people. And if the haze helps, because that's the modern cultural environment, then yes, let's use haze. If it's stained glass, then let's use stained glass. But I think we should be creative in our worship, really to strive to represent our creative God, because that's what he is. You know, and Ian's answer was amazing. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I started leading worship back in 1970. And so back then, there were some pretty corny worship songs, actually. And so I wrote my own. But they were all Bible. I mean, I'm one of the hippies that came out of the Jesus movement. And so you just took the Bible and you just wrote songs and, you did that. And then Praise One came out, and there was all these choruses, and so you learned them. There were only 3 chords. I mean, that's all the songs only had 3 chords. So they're pretty easy to play, and so we went through that, and then it began to be a little more, more developed, and so you're trying to, this is the latest thing. And, at first we were writing the words to the choruses on acetate sheets on overheads. You remember those overheads? Okay, how many of you remember those? Okay, look at this. Oh my gosh. So, and then we went to something called a negative slide in a carousel slide projector. And they went, well, what was wrong with the overhead? It's interesting how we get comfortable with certain things. And then I kind of broke the rules when I was pastoring in Phoenix. Right around 1989, I was seeing all these kids that were hard rockers, and they weren't going to church at all. And so we had a guy in our church that, he used to play in a heavy metal band. And I said, hey, let's try something. Why don't we start a rock and roll church? And yeah, and so we did, and it was called David's Cave. And so on Sunday afternoon, we'd bring in these huge HDH speakers. I mean, they were like tall as me, and then we put the riser there, put the drums up. We hung a parachute over the drums. I mean, and had the lights and all, and just. It was amazing. We reached a genre of kids that nobody would reach. And that went on for like 2 years, and then we had to move out of where we were, not because we were getting evicted, but because we needed to move the ship to another part of the city, and we launched them out on their own, and they ended up renting space and become a viable church and continuing on, and so it's sometimes we spiritualize our preferences and bring them to the same level as Scripture, and if your style is country western, no, I'm saying we're in Colorado. Okay, if your style is country western, that's not necessarily always the best style. But if your style is praise 1, praise 2, praise 3, worship, that's not necessarily the best style either. Because it all really depends, like has been said earlier, on your heart to the Lord. Because He sees right through your voice. He sees to your heart, doesn't He? And so if your heart isn't in it, even if it's like, top 10 songs, if your heart's not in it, it's wood, hay, and stubble. It's not about the noise. It's about the heart. I mean, we had a guy in our church in Phoenix that, we had to put a bucket over his head because he was so loud and so off key. But he was singing his heart out to the Lord. How does Jesus see him? And sometimes we got to just put our personal preferences down and ask, how does Jesus see us?
Yeah.
Is He seeing our heart? And you can move to another part of the sanctuary. You don't have to be next to the person who's just so off key, throws you off. But here's the deal: don't spiritualize your preferences to the point of becoming judgmental of others.
That's good.
That are different.
That was really good, Bob. I like that. And I would just add, you have permission to try new things. So try something. Try it. You can have permission to explore, to try new services, to try new outreaches. It may work, it may not work, but you have permission to expand of however the Lord wants to. You're in prayer and it's not sin, then go for it. And then see if they'll take a venture of faith and see if the Lord wants to do something new and fresh. And it's new and fresh for your church too. It's very, very exciting. So that was real. What is it again? Some people spiritualize your preferences to what? Level of Scripture. Is that what you said? That was so good. That is tweetable.
There we go. Thank you, Pastor Bob. All right, next question. Here we go. We have 15 more minutes, so we'll try to get through a few more. At what point do you differentiate between needing to take a break needing to take a break ministry-wise and just pushing through, even though things are hard because it's ministry, in quotation marks? So if you lost me, you can read it right there on the screen. But at what point do you differentiate between needing to take a break ministry-wise and just pushing through, even though things are hard because it's ministry?
That's such a tough question to answer from up here. A lot of these types of questions, I'm sure you guys can all relate. They're the kind of questions that if somebody asked you, you'd probably ask them 10 more questions before you would give an answer. Because you're kind of wanting to know what's the setting, where are you at? You could be dealing with the kind of person that they're just a little too soft and they need an exhortation after a question like that. Like, come on, put on your big boy pants and just go for it. It's not that hard. You might be that. I'm not saying that's you if you sent that question in. Or it might be, oh my goodness, I can't believe the hours that you're putting in, how full your plate has been for so many years. You need a serious break. You're in the place where your body is starting to tell you things, like Nate was sharing earlier, that you need rest and a break. I can just say for me, how it works is I believe in the Sabbath. So for me, that is Friday. And if I am running through lots of Fridays that are not Sabbath-like, I begin feeling it. My family begins feeling it. My wife begins feeling it. So that's a good check for me. If I can't have that, then I'm probably crossing beyond it's just ministry, it's got to be done, and I'm in addiction level at this point. And then for me, I don't know how everybody else feels about this. Sometimes people don't like when I say this at ministry kind of things, but I'm a believer personally because of the way I work, the way that I throw myself into the task when it's the time. that I need a significant break in the summertime. So when I first started pastoring, the first move I made was to hire a very experienced ex-senior pastor to be my assistant pastor. I needed some age. I was 29 years old when I took over a church that was 30 years old. And so I asked him to help me, and one of the first things he said was, your board is going to give you a certain amount of vacation every year, and my encouragement to you, Nate, just watching the way you are, is I want you to take it all in the summer in one stretch. And I started doing that, and it freaked me out. It just freaked me out. The first week would just freak me out. Like, I just can't wait to get back in the pulpit, and like, I can't wait to preach a sermon, And then the second week, I would kind of calm down a little bit. And for the first 10 years, I would just do 2 Sundays and then 5 days. And then I'd come back and preach that Sunday like I'd been there all week or something. And then I started just saying 3 Sundays, Nate will be out each summer. And it's been huge for our church. God gives me so much vision in that 3rd week that I'm not even working for. It's like my body begins to relax and God begins to speak. And I come home and my team says, what's next? What are we doing next? And you know what? The church survives. It's amazing. So those are some things that I would throw out there.
Great answer. Moving on. Next one. What is the favorite thing to see happening in your ministry right now? How can we learn from that as we go back to our ministries this week?
One of the favorite things that's happening in our ministry right now is that we have so many new people. And it's such an exciting time of ministering to all the new people, being stretched, having to depend upon the Lord in ways that we haven't in a long time, really having to pray more. The warfare is intensified greatly. So I think I didn't anticipate that personally. The workload increased. I kind of anticipated that, but the Lord has been very gracious to us as a team, and we've grown together, and it's been a lot of work for all of us, but there's a lot of fruit waiting for us in the extra. And I know that it can be a real discouraging having to think, well, you've been a church for 20 plus years and you need to start over. But I think it was from the Lord. It's just a gift from God, and all these fresh, new, wonderful people that have chosen to entrust us with their spiritual care so that we can oversee their lives under the Lord are here. And I just know great things. I don't have the full answer to that because I really do anticipate something's happening. There's something is gonna happen in a real wonderful way ministry-wise. But right now, it's work. Right now, it's getting to know people again. We took a little bit of a long approach to the face coverings, and we kept them on as long as the state required them and so that took away the ability to see people's faces. That's my number one way of learning our church, is to see your faces. I can see every face in this room, all in every chair, but that was taken away from me for almost 2 years. So now it's back, and I have to relearn. People are sitting in different places. That's bugging me. I said, you move over here, you move over here, all you new people over here. But in a very simple way, what's very, very exciting is we have so much newness and freshness in a ministry that's been around 22 years with the same pastor and the same, general style. And we're like, wait a minute, God's up to something. And he's used something that's been very negative and hard for the world to revitalize our church. We didn't need to do anything except be faithful. And so it's very exciting. I know it may not be so exciting for you in your church because it's hard. And you might see through, like how the Bible, I think it was Paul says, now we see through a glass dimly. So you may not see the fullness of what God is trying to accomplish. And it's only because there's a lot of stories along the way of how hard it really was and how hard it still is, but very exciting to start over. And maybe the Lord's going to speak to you about that in your life.
I just am so thankful for this question. Whoever asked it, it just rocked me, because the Lord's been dealing with me on lots of things, but one of the things he's been dealing with me on is the fact that I do not easily celebrate. And I tend to ask the question, if I were sending in that question, it would be, what's one thing in your church that you'd like to fix? And why? That's just the way I think naturally. But I'm surrounded with all these people that need to hear me saying, I'm so excited about this. So my answer is the same as Ed's, but I just wanted to say, and no, I'm not joking, like the same thing's happening in Monterey, and I'm excited about that. But what a great instructive to us who are leaders to be the kind of people who are celebrating what God is doing rather than always walking around correcting the things that need to be changed. Yeah.
I agree with both of you guys. I think that it has this summer, this kind of going into fall has been just an exciting time of kind of revitalization for our church in a really cool way. But I think the thing that got me really excited recently was seeing, like, we just rolled out a whole bunch of new vision and direction in 2020 at the very beginning of the year. It was like 2020 vision, right? You know what I mean? It's really more like hindsight 2020. But we rolled out with all this vision, and we're doing this thing, and we're going for this, and then it was like, right? It's like what's going on? And I think what we did was just really consistently speak that and lead people in that and what we were doing. And it's cool to see our church grab hold of those things and start to run with them in a way that is not me directed or our staff directed. That's been really cool to see. Just to see people actually grabbing hold of what God's doing, owning it for themselves and running forward into the vision is such a blessing that just kind of blew me away this summer. In fact, I went on the Mountain Life camping. We had a camping trip that we did, and I went on the camping trip, and we had some people from our Glenwood Springs campus come, and JD and I and my worship pastor went over there every single Sunday night for a year in person doing this like church planning thing over there at our second campus for a year. It was grind. And we knew everybody, and there's some of those guys over here today. You guys are awesome. Whoop, yep. But I went to this camping trip, and none of the people that I knew went on the camping trip, but there were like people there that I didn't know who were like just so stoked about what was going on there. And it wasn't about me. It wasn't like, oh, we love you. It was like they were so excited about what God was doing and how these guys and the people that were there had grabbed hold of that and were running into it. So that's the thing that really is stoking me out right now, is just seeing people get their hands on the net, really, I think, so.
Yeah, Pastor Ed and I were doing a podcast, and he threw a question at me. He said, what would an older Bob Claycamp tell a younger Bob Claycamp who's just starting out? So I've been in ministry a long time, and the answer came right to me. And the answer was, I would tell him to spend more time with the people, and don't be so concerned with every nuance of the Greek and the Hebrew, because you're dealing with people in their life situations and their changes. And so I had a time to think about that, and then what was presented to us was to go and help out the church in Windsor, Colorado, who lost their pastor and wife. And it was one of those times where both my wife and I were just a little freaked out, because now we're stepping into a situation of people we don't know at all. And and being a transitional senior pastor, not the main senior pastor, but to see him through the winter and the holidays, and then help the board in that process. And so that's a step of faith for us. And we have been through so many steps of faith in our Christian walk. We know what it feels like when it's another one coming up. But it's always exciting. It's an adventure. When you enter the land of I don't know, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You can say something and get yourself into trouble and lose half the church. And so, you have to depend upon the Lord all over again. And there's that coming back to the base and saying, okay, God, it has to be you to work. I can't just rely upon my ministry experience. I've got to really love people. I've got to listen. I'm going to mention it tomorrow morning, but there's this phrase: listen to understand, don't listen to answer back. And so that means you take time to listen to what people are saying and you digest it, and don't just defend back or throw a quick answer. And that's also the answer for you husbands and wives. Listen to understand, don't listen to answer back. And so it's part of the adventure of being in ministry. If it's becoming a drudgery, you've lost your sense of mystery and excitement. And you need to get back to the basics. You need to get back to you and Jesus again. Because you remember when you started, it was so exciting. It was just so adventurous. And God wants to renew that because He can. And we have to want that. So that's what's going on the question's gone. So I don't even know what the question was now. That's it. I'm done. Yeah, okay.
And that will conclude session 3. We ended exactly on time. Thank you, guests. Thank you for sending your questions, everybody.